Hi, this is our resistor linearizer setup program and hopefully a quick demo to explain how we get to this situation right here. That these are K ohms of resistors that are going to be used, 1.5 K, 2.9, etc., that are going to be applied to the 7 breakpoints to match a current that will linearize a particular attenuator. And so let's go back to the beginning a bit. Here's the beginning, let's say, and that is measured data for dB steps and what's your diode current to satisfy those dB step requirements. But of course the linearizer does not understand or care about dB steps. It's going to be driven by a voltage on the tuning input. So because I know that the design request was that this be 6 dB per volt to get 10 volts at 60, but also with a little bit of extra room. We've got this set up 10 volts at 60, 6 dB per step, gives us these voltage settings right here, and these currents that were measured for those required voltage tunings. So I'm going to copy that and go to this blank version of that beautiful one that you just saw that has been filled in. I'm going to just paste the numbers there, and well, let me just turn off what breakpoint games I had been playing. When this is first started up, these will likely be all in the minimum states, and you can see I'm dragging sliders down. Hopefully it's also instructive. You can see how the sliders behave. But anyway, let's get back to the design process. What I wanted to show you is that this blue line is simply the data. This is the tuning voltage, and that's an output current graph. And we have to make some design choices in this area besides putting in the data of the curve that we want to fit to. Thinking about this part, the APD7 UA2 has a 15 K ohm input impedance, which is split in the middle, and that goes out to a compensation pin. So you have alternative ways of driving the input, and so that's represented here in this decision box. And so are you applying the tune voltage to which one, the compensation input or the input pin per se? And if we well, discuss this rest of this application, the situation is that there's a 5-volt reference. If there was a 7-volt, you could type that in, whatever. The little blue dashes are to try to tell you that this is a box that you should modify. And the blue background in this case says that you have a sufficiently high tuning voltage to, rather a sufficiently high reference voltage for the given tuning voltage. But let's look down here. We're going to have 11.67 as a worst case high voltage coming in. So let's just plop that in there. Maximum applied tuning voltage of 11.67. And you see that our 5-volt reference is not going to be sufficient if we're going to use the input pin, because it's going to divide that in half. As I mentioned, it's a 7.5 K double, input divider, and so that's going to lead us to having 5.8 volts internal to the part, which is less than the max, the voltage reference. So what we're going to do, we could either just change this to a 6-volt reference and it'd be good, but because we want to just stay with the 5 that was requested, we're going to, instead of using the input 7.5 K divider, we're going to use the compensation pin and put our own value of 11 K external. And what that did, that's a number that I just kind of backed into, or you could do a little bit of math, but the concept being that when you put 11.67 volts on the input of this 11K slash 7.5 K divider, the internal voltage is never going to get higher than 4.73, and that makes the 5-volt reference a lot better, and now it's acceptable. So that's the situation that we start with. In addition, we have the alternatives in APD7 UA2 that it's a dual output, so we can either use the two outputs tied together externally, and that gives us double the current, or we can do other tricks with it, such as using one of the outputs to drive diodes, the other one to drive a resistor, and then putting spikes between them. We're going to assume, because this is a relatively high current application, that we don't need that spiking thing. The speed so far hasn't seemed to be a tight spec. We'll see in the lab a bit, but so we're going to tie the two outputs together, and that'll be the best DC situation. If we have to redo it the other way, we can. But so we're going to assume here, see if I put either, this is going to multiply the output by a factor of 1. If we only use the one output, it'll multiply the output by a factor of 2, obviously, if we tie the two together. So here's our data, and here are sliders that will allow us to move the breakpoints to match the blue curve. We start at the low end tuning and make it better as we go. That'll make sense to you as I proceed. So this has a breakpoint voltage, put decimal points here, of 5 volts, so that's why all these breakpoints are not doing anything. They're intentionally out of the range. As I bring this guy down and give him some kick so you can see it a little better, you can see nothing happens till you get to some breakpoint, and then it goes up, and this is the amount to which it goes up. The numerics behind this are something you don't have to worry about till we get to the bottom page, and actually it's all taken care of for you. So it's merely a graphic game at this point. We know that the first breakpoint we want basically to start at 0, so we have a 0 breakpoint voltage there, and we want to always keep our lines pretty much hugging but under the data curve. There's a glitch in here. I'm not sure exactly if that's going to show up to be real or not when we take data. I believe that's probably a measurement inaccuracy. And so basically this is hugging the line, and this is also someplace in here somebody's not quite right, but we'll not worry too much about that till we get to the real world. Anyway, I'm now going to add another breakpoint, and I'm going to throw the gain on pretty high so you can see him come onto the scene. And so there's a breakpoint right about there. But I want to snug it up to the blue line, maybe there. And then I'm going to add another breakpoint. I give it some juice so you can see it, and then I'm going to walk it in. And you can see that I'm bending the line up at a slightly different point than the first one. And I can leave some errors that I'll fix with subsequent breakpoints. And that's a subsequent one right there. See where he's kicking pretty close to that one. Maybe that wasn't too bad. And now I'm going to kick on another one. This is not hard work. It's kind of fun. So you get these guys to line up. Keep on doing that. Some of this is experience as far as how much you're going to want. You generally, you know, how much room you're going to leave yourself to fix. Because like I only have one breakpoint left. So maybe I want to distribute these guys a little further forward and give them a little more gain so that they hug a little better. And that'll make the life of the last breakpoint a little more tenable. And so, I mean, he's going to need a lot of juice, and that's pretty typical of the last breakpoint. Hang on a second, Dave, I'm just doing a video. And that's Dave. And so here we go, and try to get these breakpoints to fit the curve. And Dave's not taking no for an answer, so we'll get right back to you. So just to tidy this up a little bit, you might find that we can position the breakpoints a little bit more effectively than I have done, and knock that down a little bit, bring it forward. Okay, at some point here I'm going to say, hey, that's pretty cool, and pretty much of a curve fit. Certainly could do better if I wasn't being filmed right now. And so there's a lot going on down here. It looks complicated, but it's all just doing the work behind the scenes. So this is the curve that you saw plotted, the orange curve. And this is the current contribution of each of the breakpoints. You can see as they each come on at different tuning voltages. And down here's what it's all about. This is, while we were moving the sliders, that was changing the breakpoint voltage and the Thevenin equivalent of the resistance. And then this just goes through basic electronics calculations to get you 10k ohm to ground and 4.73. I had to get it backwards. This is the up one. 10k to plus 5 volt reference, 4.73k to ground, 5.4k to the pull-up 5 volt reference, 5.4k also, because look, this is a 2.5 volt breakpoint turn on, so you see how that makes sense. This one here is 2.3k pull up and 3.82 pull down, so that's why we're starting to rise above the midpoint, and etc. like that. This division by 0 just tells you have an infinite resistance because we went to 0 on that first slider, and so that warns you just to leave that open. All you really have there is a single resistor to ground. All the other breakpoints have pairs. Now that's the calculation. When you actually get on the bench, you may find that to improve the turn on, that you may need a very high value. Start with like a 10k or so to the plus or minus reference or rails that you've got, to put a very small offset, because there's usually a small offset within the APD7UA2, and it's going to vary from unit to unit a little bit. So this is the major one that's going to shift. Everything else you won't see that offset. It's just right at 0, as you know, to get a linearizer to come on smoothly. Sometimes you want to play with that value. So the VREF current, just so you select the reference IC or whatever correctly, is about 7.6, 7.7 milliamps. That changes versus tuning voltage, but that's probably the worst case you're going to see. You also, don't forget, you've got the 24 whatever milliamps that's going to go out the output spigot, and not a lot of waste current inside the linearizer. So what we just did is pulled in some measured data in Excel and slid some lines around, and voila, we got resistors that we can stick on. Now, by the way, if you wanted to only crudely linearize this thing and you didn't want to bother with that many breakpoint resistor setups, well, you could probably do, let's get these breakpoints, come on you little nasty, get these breakpoints out of the way, put them over 5 volts where they won't hurt anybody, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So just 4 breakpoints here, we can probably you know, get to a pretty close approximation of what we want. Excuse me, and move that around like that, and so you can see that you can almost do as well with less, whoopsies, with less breakpoints. I went too far on that one. And obviously another lesson to be learned is don't try to do this while you're talking, because there's a sweet spot in here, and I'm not going to find it while continuing the video, even though this is kind of fun. What did I do? There we go. So enjoy and happy linearizing, and we will catch you on the other side.